Alors bonjour et bienvenue. Merci de vous joindre à nous.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for taking part in this conversation today. We're going to wait for everybody to connect to the call, and we're going to be able to start in just a few minutes. So thank you.
Alors, je propose qu'on commence tout de suite.
So I think we should start right away. Hello and welcome, and thank you again for joining us and taking part in this conversation on gender equality in rural areas. Before starting, I just want to let you know that for this whole webinar, we will indeed have interpretation into English. And so if you prefer listening in English, well, you just have to click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and to select English or French. So thanks to Adrienne, who is doing interpretation for us today. I'm going to say this again in English.
Thank you for joining us today for a very interesting conversation between three fantastic Amazon on gender equality in rural areas. I will start by noting that we do have a simultaneous interpretation available for the conversation today. So if you will prefer to listen in English or French, you can just click on the interpretation icon, a kind of globe at the bottom of your screen, and select English or French channel. Adrienne is here with us today for that. So thank you so much for helping us today, Adrienne. Alors, mon nom est Fernanda Banda.
I am Fernanda Banda. I am the Enterprise Program Manager. And so I'd just like to say that today I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, Omamiwinini Nation, the original and ancestral custodian of this territory, which remains unceded to this day. This is where Enterprise's offices are located. We salute the resistance and resurgence of Indigenous peoples in this process of decolonization. And we are committed to defending and promoting the voice and values of our host nation. And so I encourage you to tell us in the chat which nation's ancestral territory you are joining us from. So you can do that in the chat. For those who don't know, Interpares stands for equals. We are among equals. We are a feminist social justice organization that was created in 1975 to address social injustice in Canada and around the world. We believe in solidarity as a mode of action and collaboration, and we work primarily on 8 issues. So among them are women's rights, resource control, economic justice, peace and democracy, health, migration, climate justice, and food sovereignty. We work in Latin America, Africa, Asia, India, and Canada with several organizations that we call counterparts. And this is the case for the 3 organizations to which the three panelists who we're honored to have among us today. So this webinar is part of the work that we're doing with our West African counterparts in the framework, well, as part of the Gender Equality through Women's Agroecology in West Africa project, which aims to empower women in rural West Africa. And it's a project that is funded by World Affairs Canada. So it's an honor for me to host this conversation that brings together three exceptional women leaders and coaches of the agricultural and women's rights movements, each of whom brings an inspiring perspective on rural women through their experiences. So generally, when we talk about rural women, be it as part of a discourse or in literature, it is often under the prism of vulnerabilities, and particularly with regard to West African countries. In Canada, it is difficult to find recent gender-specific data on rural women, but in both cases, in fact, in both cases, as if rural areas are a blind spot for gender equality. And I look forward to understanding why alongside these three panelists. So we have Debiya Ifra So, who accompanies or guides women's groups in the river region of Senegal with Enda Pronat and Senegalese counterpart organization. Jenn Pfenning, who is president of the National Farmers Union of Canada, and Mariamé Ouattara, a gender expert who has been working for several decades with women's groups in West Africa, and she is joining us from Burkina Faso. So thank you, ladies, for accepting this invitation. In terms of technical aspects, we set aside 10 minutes at the very end of the webinar for questions and comments, but I'm going to invite you to write your questions throughout the webinar, and my colleague Mariette Diallo, our communications director, and she will take care of collecting all of your questions and to read them out to the panelists at the end of the conversation. To start the conversation today, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to tell us also how rural women are doing in their country or their areas of intervention, the regions, and what the situation of rural women is in their respective countries. And so I'll propose that we'll start with Debiya and then go to Jane and then finish with Mariamé. Debiya.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Je vous salue tous. Moi, je m'appelle Debiya Ifra.
I am Debiya Ifrasoy,
Je suis la chargée des
and
activités
I
de genre
am
et
in
de la
charge
femme
of
dans
gender
la
activities
zone zone fleuve du Sénégal.
in
Et
Senegal.
là, actuellement,
And
je suis
currently,
le point focal du projet
the
égal
focus of our projects,
à la zone nord. Pour
that is the
répondre
focus of our
aux
projects here
questions,
right now.
vous me recevez?
Are you hearing me? Yes, we hear you very well, Debiya, no problem.
Alors, la situation des femmes rurales
So in terms of the situation of rural women in our region,
de manière générale,
so I'll just speak about Senegal in general. I'll just come back to, so we are a democratic republic with had political alternatives since 2012. The population here is 17 million inhabitants. In terms of gender equality, the law was adopted. There was a law that was adopted in 2010 with our elected officials for gender equality on the social positioning and also on rights, etc., as well as economic rights. In spite of this, these women are having rural women are having issues with domestic violence and and also there's they work a lot, so 12 hours a day in the agricultural field oftentimes, and so there are initiatives to transform and to produce to process and to grow different agricultural products. And so at the national level, there also there's the national network of women that helps them out as well. So if I speak about my specific area of intervention or region, here we can say that women have several activities. They obviously have agricultural activities, but also hiring activities. And so they take various monies to buy and sell various different things. So yes, we have agriculture, livestock as well, and small businesses. In terms of implementing this work by women, even if they have access to it, they don't control it. They have access, but these same women have difficulty of doing this work. So the youngest have less experience, and obviously the elderly have less strength. So these women were really victims and they obviously have to do a lot of different things in terms of domestic tasks. So they are in charge of procreation and various other domestic duties. And so they have several things to manage in terms of in their communities, and so they don't have very much availability. So in terms of production and other resources, women have lesser rights than those of men in terms of ownership as well. Basic education that is given to young girls means that they have to be submissive to the will of men as well. And so there are consequences here. There's a favoritism as well, which is the basis of discrimination. So we can say that this is a very precarious social position that they're in. And this is a factor in terms of access to food security. So we want to make sure that they have a secure access. We want to make sure that they're able to work correctly, and we want to promote women's independence, economic independence, and we want to also encourage their involvement in decision making, and also to fight so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Sorry, there's a little bit of a problem with the sound at the end.
Hello, bonjour. I'm
Hello.
happy to say that I'm coming to you from the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and neutral peoples. My family farm here, we are grateful to be on this land and to share it with the Indigenous people in our community. As introduction for myself, yes, I'm the president of the National Farmers Union. I'm also a mother and a farmer. We grow about 700 acres of vegetables on my family farm and have been farming for many generations. The situation of women in Canada is in many ways very different than what we've just heard. But on the surface, underneath, there are challenges. We are facing hidden risks to the rights that we now enjoy. Some of the things that have changed for the better over my lifetime, such as being able to access banking institutions, bank accounts, credit, etc., as a woman, has been afforded us during my lifetime. But many of the rights that we currently enjoy are at threat from right-wing, rising populist type of ideologies that we see already threatening women in the US with reproductive rights restrictions and oppressions. In Canada, one of the big concerns that we have as rural women is our continued responsibility for many of the household and family obligations that prevents us often from pursuing other interests or responsibilities outside of childcare. It does continue to dominate as a woman's role in society. But a lot of things have improved on that front, and we are very grateful for that. That means that we need to stand in solidarity with our sisters around the world. And that's part of what we do here as National Farmers Union and our involvement with Interpares and La Via Campesina. Together, we can stand and we can raise each other up.
Thank you so much, Jane. Mariamé.
Mariamé. Mariamé is going to speak to us about women in Burkina Faso. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Mariamé, you need to put your microphone on, please. Hello, everyone. In Burkina Faso, women are doing quite well, I would say, but a large part of these women is affected by insecurity. That is, they're no longer in they're displaced persons. They're no longer in their home. They've had to move regions to save their lives, along with those of their families. So we have 2 million people who have been displaced, and 60% of them are women, and then 40% of children as well. So anyway, it's the rural areas that are the most affected by this, and it's mainly women and their families that are affected. Women around the world following this commemoration in mid-March, the International Women's Rights, the International Day to celebrate women's rights. Obviously, we need to continue to bring attention to this. I'm Mariamé Wukana, and I'm a social and family economist, and I'm an expert in that. And I accompany Interpares in their AO program for West Africa. In terms of the situation of rural women in Burkina Faso, I would start by giving you a few statistics from our last census, our last general census in 2019. And so we have in West Africa, Francophone West Africa, we have 20,500,000 inhabitants, and we have more than 50% women represented. And the rural population is estimated at 15 million. So you can, as you can see, it is a more rural country than urban. Of that portion, rural women represent over 80% of the feminine population. That's a huge figure. So just to talk about statistics in terms of birth, fertility, well, the fertility level, the number of children that each woman has is 5.8 in the rural areas, and it's 4.1 in urban areas. So this is also obviously a significant impediment to the advancement of rural women. We have a rural area that has 231.4 women who die in pregnancy, in childbirth for every 1,000. This is a huge figure. This is a lack of care or the influence of social norms that prevent these women from going to medical centers. It's a problem. The rate of The rate of literacy is
Et la majorité en milieu rural n'est pas du tout alphabétisée. Et comme les femmes
the majority of women in rural areas are not literate. And
ramasser ainsi comme
so
ça,
if you look at all of these statistics put
à
together,
partir d'une recherche faite par Oxfam en 2015.
following
Comme Fernande l'a dit au
a
début,
study done by Oxfam Burkina in 2015. We have many studies that are done, but not very many on women, but production in is the main job occupied by women in Burkina Faso. They are responsible for 40%, and they occupy 63% of main activities in primary sectors of agriculture. And they also participate in approximately 70% of all national GDP activities. So their role is essential to the development of our country. And so 65% are farmers. 65% of all farmers are women, and 60%. And so most of them, so they only get 4.3% of the agricultural revenues. So this is obviously an extremely unfair situation. The distribution of this wealth is a big problem. So I'm going to, this is still a problem. So in terms of ownership of land, well, women have difficulty accessing land, indeed. We don't understand why this problem exists. I'm going to refer to the data from the FAO in West Africa. Women, 8% of women are own their land. Sorry, of ownership, only 8% are women. So since they are not owners of their land, they have problems to have get guarantees with banks, etc., and to get credit that's consistent enough to sustain their activities. So they need access to equipment as well, machinery, of course, and we don't consider rural women as owner of the operations. It's mainly men that are considered the owners of this. So this is a continuous problem. In spite of the increased productivity that is continuing, in spite of all of these issues, there is a low consumption of our products. So there's an added value that's lost there as well, and they are less represented in various agencies and organizations because public policies, politicians in any case, say in their discourse that we are giving room to rural women, but in practice this is not happening. So there is obviously a vulnerability to climate change, whose effects are only increasing day by day. And so women have are facing a lot of issues. And there was a multidimensional analysis that was done in 2018 by the OECD. And they said they were trapping women in a vicious cycle, and then not allowing them to participate in economic activities. So they can't fully, but they obviously have the right to participate in these activities, and because this is life for people who work in the agricultural milieu. So women, Burkina women, rural women, live in a social, cultural, and institutional context. We ratified all sorts of as a country, we ratified all sorts of different instruments, international instruments to protect our rights, but they're not being respected. So we have one that guarantees the right of equality between sexes. So we wonder, why are women still living under this weight that limits their participation? Well, we have instruments in place. So we're going to see that there are initiatives that are trying to use these texts to really change the situation. So that's a little bit what I can say quickly about the situation of rural women. There's a lot of hope today. We're going to continue the discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much to you both for that context. We understand that the issues facing women's rights are not limited to West Africa, but these are global issues which also affect Canada, as Jane mentioned. Now I'd like to hear Jenn regarding the organization, women's organizations, to see all the barriers that they've overcome. We know that in the farmers, for farmers, we know that in Canada and in Quebec, they've been at the heart of organizing. So I just want to know what the actions are that are being brought forward, Jenn, to try to undo the patriarchy and to remove all these barriers.
Thank you for that question. The National Farmers Union was founded in 1969. And back then, you know, there were a lot of things that were different than they are today for women globally and certainly here in Canada. But the National Farmers Union was founded with a woman's leadership role at every level of the organization and identified the value and importance of women in rural life and especially in farming through that organization. And what that has done, it has created a perception of leadership for women within farming communities and within the National Farmers Union, to the extent that we have had presidents, women presidents for many years, aside from the identified roles for women. And to me, that's one of the ways that there is a positive shift that's happened through that organizing and through that identified leadership space, because people can see women in leadership spaces. Working collectively at the local level and all the way through is very important for us. It's also important to note that we have now, as of a few years ago, the very first woman as agriculture minister in Canada. And that, while it may seem symbolic, is also important because it shows that we have an equal space, even at the highest level of governance in the country. That has brought a lot of attention and thought to the situation of women in Canada. Another aspect of organization for us is to ensure that we're connecting with other countries and with women in other spaces. Part of that is very important, additionally, because migrant workers coming from many places come into Canada working on farms, and they have a very different experience. They are vulnerable in different ways than men coming to work as migrant laborers have. And I'm sure I don't need to detail for anybody else on this panel the situation that many migrant women face, especially if they are isolated in rural communities. So that connection and active participation in upholding each other's rights within the country and through the mechanisms of the National Farmers Union and organizations like Interpares and La Via Campesina become extra important. We see very many cases, even in Canada, of workers' rights being abused and of workers being oppressed. And that is another aspect that we have to consider. And I know we don't have a lot of time for each of these questions, so I'm going to leave it there to have space for the other panelists to speak.
Oui, mais j'aimerais que tu poursuives un peu plus dans ce.
I would actually like you to continue on and since 1969, when the NFU was created, do you think that things have changed regarding women's rights, be it in your actions or even within society itself, within Canadian society in a general way? Were there advances, progress in terms of women's rights? Or are we seeing in terms of economic and right issues and climate change, do you think we're going back to the past a little bit? So I just wanted to know from your experience and your vision as a woman farmer.
Yes, a lot has changed. And as there are increasingly women who are leading farm businesses and who are recognized as the farmer. In English, we talk about often the farmer and then the farm wife. And people identify women on farms as farm wives. And it's interesting that the NFU president before me is a single operator. She is the farmer. But many times when she goes to engage, whether it's with the bank or with anywhere, they assume that her partner, who is not a farmer, is the farmer and that she is the secondary. I've had the experience too of going to the bank and being asked, "Oh, are you helping your husband today?" As if I'm an appendage to him. So it's interesting that while structurally a lot has changed, there are still so many attitudes in society that have not changed. But creating those spaces of leadership, those positions of leadership, has been important in moving the needle as much as it has moved. With the rise of right-wing ideology and many of the isolating situations that have happened through the pandemic, I think that has put women, well, it's not just my thoughts, we see it, that women are facing increased domestic violence. We're seeing that especially rural women are experiencing that. And as we come out of this pandemic, it's going to be very important to ensure that we find ways to reconnect people who've been isolated. And back to the right-wing ideologies and conspiracies that we've seen take so much hold across the population, those are threatening women as well, especially in situations where there is a defiance of order and an anarchist angle to the conspiracy. There are young women in my community who are facing problems with family because of that. And they are struggling to hold the family together, to hold the business together, as chaos threatens to make them lose everything through these ideologies that put them at odds with government and the rest of society. How do we work against that? Connect. We have to form spaces, we have to reach out, we have to, and I don't have all the answers and we haven't figured it all out. But each of us and in our organizations, I know in Canada, we are working actively on programs to support women specifically in mental health. Suicide is something that none of us wants to talk about, but it is a very big challenge here in Canada for farmers. And I believe globally from what I see, of statistics, but it's something that nobody likes to talk about. Mental health is not just a product of isolation, it's also a product of the global pressure on farmers that is taking away the profitability of our farms. And the societal pressures against the ways of farming and that are isolating us in multitudes of ways. But working together, and one of the things that we're focused on is that mental health piece and connecting and bringing awareness to the issue.
Thank you so much, Jenn. Nous avons la chance d'avoir
We have the chance to have in this webinar 3 generations of women, including a young leader in the movement, in the agricultural movement, Debiya. I'd like to ask you, Debiya, to know what motivated you to join this women's rights movement, and what actions do you, what actions have been taken by pioneers in this movement in Senegal and in other places? Do you think what do you think the young generation can bring in terms of this feminist outlook? Thank you, Fernand. Personally, I am a rural woman. I was born and raised in a rural setting. So there's that. So I'm part of these communities, and I've seen the combat. So it would be like these fights, whether it be access to land or whatever it might be, and slowly a big passion rose within me. Because when I was little, I saw women, rural women, in spite of all the work, their huge workload with the family and their domestic tasks, but I saw them doing everything to go and to help other families and to help out in the fields. We have something called the Grand Wallo. And so this is something that that is collective and belongs to all. It's collective farming. So they have a big plot. As we call this a fallow. And so so everything, once we do our harvest, everything comes into the house. It goes into the houses. So I went and asked them questions and to see how they managed to get that up and running. I was in a family where I rarely saw a woman speaking in public. I remember seeing someone when I was young during a meeting. She was speaking in front of all the men, and psychologically, I figured, oh, she's strong. I'm going to do everything I can to be like her and to help guide these women and to allow them to speak in public, to be listened to without having to listen to criticisms from people. So we have traditions, and we have also our Muslim religion here. And along these lines, we say that women, no, they don't intervene this way. They shouldn't speak. So slowly, you can see that things are changing. And I also had the chance since I was in, and also my first teacher was in fact a woman in primary school. She encourages me, and I asked her tons of questions. And I thought, she said, well, eventually, I figured eventually I'm going to abandon school, and I'm going to get married and have and I'm going to have a family as well. But he said, well, why don't I go back? Well, I figured, why don't I go back to that same rural area and help women there? So I was in university and my master's, and I had to prepare my dissertation. And so I listened to these women, and I did a project. Right? Anyway, I would go and listen to these women, and I would accompany them and guide them. And this awareness about responsibilities, and also to help men to reduce the the burden of domestic tasks on women. But we have difficulty, even women have difficulty accepting this. At the end of the day, men will go towards women and they'll try to help them, and then the woman will say, no, I refuse because of I'm supposed to be submissive to your authority. So, but with this awareness, we've been able to break the ice, and say, well, if you help your wife to accomplish these domestic tasks, she will have more time for herself. And so, obviously, she'll be able to contribute to the family economically and to do many more things in the field as well. So overall, that's about it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Debiya. It's very interesting to hear your experience and these figures that marked you, and all the women that that's helped you and that you're helping now in this rural areas. So we're going to look now at rural women across the women share similar challenges. So for the last few years, we've also noticed that there's a worldwide resistance by women from different countries over various different key issues. But with regard to rural women, it's as if that solidarity movement is not very apparent. So I'd like to hear Mariamé on the role that solidarity is playing in this in the fight for recognizing women's rights in Burkina Faso. I know that you worked on reinforcing capacity with the partners in West Africa, and I'd like you to give us a little bit of your view on solidarity. Is it obviously it exists between different rural women across the world, and what are the tools that can help us build our mobilization in this regard? Mariamé, thank you, Fernand. I totally agree with you. That solidarity that Jenn spoke about can be seen from it doesn't necessarily apply to rural women. However, they have cultivated or so many things. They have developed initiatives to absorb the deficit in technical information that we have and the issues that persist to this day. And they've done it in associations and unions and federations and cooperatives, in networks, and even in alliances. They sometimes create coalitions to influence decision makers and to continue to work on improving their economic situation. That's not nothing. It's proof that they have that alone they can't change the situation, but together they were able to create these groups or associations and integrated as a symbol of solidarity. So strength in numbers, and let's work together. If we just lie down, well, we're just going to die. So we need to work. There are marches that put together. So all of these initiatives have improved the condition of women every day. So even if so, there is the various different organizations that they've integrated into in Burkina Faso, for instance, and there's a college of women who discuss problems that are specific to rural women, so they can be integrated into various different national strategies, international ones as well. And several women have become municipal advisors, or and so this has taken, so solidarity does exist, and rural women do engage in this. It's not very well documented though. unfortunately, we have intellectual women, we have the ability to speak about these things. We're talking about rural women as a subject instead of giving them the floor so they can express what they're living through or what they're creating. And that's unfortunate. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to congratulate Interpares for this webinar because the more of these kinds of things that we organize, the more we're going to learn about what rural women have created and invented and what the changes they're making to the world and how they've changed the world. So I've also worked with many rural women since I started my studies, and I can say that my thesis in '84 was entitled "The Situation of Rural Women in my area in West Burkina Faso." And for 5 years in college, and until the end of my studies, I saw the suffering of these women, and I shared in it, and I was inspired, and I said, Mariamé, I've got to do something in your studies to help these women to create change. So once I finished, I sought the possibilities to work with them directly, and I said, thank you, God. I was able to get into various different organizations and different projects to help these women to become more to engage in solidarity, and that is also supported by organizations, national ones, in the private the practice sector as well, and NGOs, international ones like Interpares, and so they are more and more informed for that reason, and we're trying to exploit all of these resources to ensure that we can push the solidarity to its max. So through my experiences, I worked for 6 years for an American foundation, and we had a program called Rural Women Create Change. And we gave bursaries to organizations to take this money to create change around them. And I assure you, it was in Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And there's another program in Senegal as well. And I assure you, after 6 years, many women in the rural milieu recognized that we changed the situation thanks to the support. There was training, there was funding, and they were able to speak to the highest level of government as well. And so in the States, under Clinton, for instance, there was a big meeting of women, and they were able to speak about their situation, and they were able to claim their rights, women's rights, and so this has been very fruitful, but we need to continue to work to document and capitalize to have better publish this. And so I would love to participate in that process. So that's what I have to say for now, unless there are any other questions. I don't want to monopolize the floor here. Thank you very much, Mariamé. So I'm going to invite the panelists now and the public to ask their questions in the chat and to make any comments. And we're already getting towards the end of the webinar, and we're going to concentrate just for a few minutes on this these questions. And my last question regarding solutions. Mariamé, Jenn, and Debiya, you've already spoken to this, but we want to know also the actions that are being taken by organizations that you're working for. We know that agroecology is an approach that is promoted by your organizations to help women in rural situations, but it's difficult to understand sometimes why agroecology is a good solution. So could you please illustrate this quickly with an example? I'm going to start with Debiya. Can you illustrate why the actions of your organization and why agroecology is a good solution? I can say that Endapronat's actions, agroecology is a solution, and it will remain a solution. If I take the example of rural women who, on a daily basis, think that that they need to do only household tasks, and well, by promoting agroecology, we were able to show them what they could do out in the fields. Producers who stopped using chemical pesticides through this, and so promoting agroecology and its transition, the agroecological transition, women in the rural setting, I can confirm that they're no longer in the transition towards agroecology, but in agroecology, doing agroecology itself. So they were managed by men, and we're trying to do everything that we can to create awareness about methods, to get away from conventional agriculture, which is already sort of anchored in their ways of doing things. And so this way, they're becoming more autonomous and independent, and they're able to participate more. Agroecology also has allowed them to participate in decision-making and governance. They recognize that this has progressed as well. So there are many women who say that the products that they process and market from what they grow in the fields, they're able to make different clothes, etc., to improve their way of life as well. So, they can also buy sheep that they can raise for 4 to 6 months and then resell them to multiply their revenues. So there's a significant economic benefit from that, so that they can reinvest. So agroecology is not an activity for poor people like we think, but it allows people to have a livelihood. I know that Jenn and Mariamé have a lot to offer also on agroecology, but I'm going to propose that we maybe start by answering the question that I think is very important or interesting. Seeing the time go by. I see a question. I don't know, Maria too. If you're able to get any other questions from the chat, but I can see one here in the chat that is asking the panelists to speak a little bit about their experience of rural women in terms of violence, gender-based violence, or also sexual violence. It's one of the questions I see in here. Mariamé, Maria2, sorry. Yes, we have several questions in the chat, questions in English, and there's one here that I'm going to read.
Of so many women and children. Is this something that you find can be changed in the future? So maybe a question for Jenn.
It's a very good question, and one that I think would take a lot longer than we have to answer properly. There are always, because of the ways that societies have been structured and the inequality that women face globally, when we see whether it is war or whether climate change impacts, all of those tend to have a disproportionate impact on women and children. Women are facing, equally as they are displaced, disproportionate vulnerabilities. And when I think about women who are on the move, who their vulnerability to becoming pregnant and the increased vulnerability that creates for them in that situation, is one of the aspects that greatly exacerbates their plight in situations of displacement. But when women are in a patriarchal society where they are oppressed and there is instability, it becomes even more difficult for them to leave. It becomes their lack of access to financial means or lack of ability to speak for themselves or move freely becomes an added hurdle to accessing the help that they need to move safely. Like I said, it's a very big question and one that would take a very long time to answer, but I think those are sort of the main themes that I see.
Thank you very much, Jenn. Fernando, est-ce qu'on aurait la place pour une dernière question?
Oui, on aura de la place pour une.
Do we have time for a last question? Yes, we do. Can I answer just quickly in a few seconds? Yes, violence based on gender-based violence. There's a lot of unfortunate experiences in which women have died. Some have been mutilated, excluded. There's too much gender-based violence in these rural areas because of socio-cultural norms and also the law of omerta. So there are customs that say that when a woman dies due to gender-based violence, they go to paradise. So can you imagine if those types of imagine if that type of mentality is held by women, that they believe that if these things happen to them, that they're going to go to paradise? This is awful. And there are several organizations that have taken the baton to fight today, and we have been denouncing this in Burkina Faso, and there are serious sanctions for the authors of this type of violence. And so I think we could do a whole other webinar on since I've been speaking, I want to add to what Debiya said as well in terms of solution and agroecology. Agroecology supports subsistence, means of subsistence. And so this goes for women and men, and it changes lives because everything's based on practical needs and also on strategic plans. So we need to integrate this to help better target strategic interests and bring them about. So we are continuing to build to try to promote more positive masculinity because people have misunderstood this. They think it's an inversion of roles. It's taking away power from men and giving it back to women. And so we need to continue to work with this knowledge and to help promote positive masculinity and equality of gender through that. And so the privilege that was given through our social constructs to men and our patriarchy, we need to break it down in order to create a positive masculinity, to break down all of these structures, because it's been over 30 years that we've been working on development, but we feel that there's still a lot of things to do because men feel threatened, and so we need to continue to work on that. So that's what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariamé. I think that answers the question that was asked. How do you think that we can allow men to better understand these issues, and how do we create positive masculinity through this? To conclude, if we had a last word to say here, a sentence or a word that will remain in the consciousness of the people in terms of rural women actions, agroecology, if there was one phrase, one word, what would it be? Jenn, Mariamé, and then Debiya at the end.
The systems that are destroying our environment and the soil and farm and putting all of women at risk are based on the same ideas and ideology as the patriarchy that has oppressed us in societies around the world. And so feminism and agroecology have shared tenets that lift up all voices and lift up all people. Feminism and women's rights have never been about triumph of women over men, but in supporting the fundamental rights that we all should be afforded, that we all should have access to. And I look to the next generation, my sons, and see the way that they interact with women and the way that they support and behave. And that gives me hope. That gives me hope that what we are doing and what we have done is changing the world and changing it for the better. We're not there yet. We have to continue fighting, but we're moving.
Thank you, Jane. Mariamé, si tu avais un dernier mot, une phrase.
Mariamé, a last word or phrase. I would say that women, rural women, need to be able to act as a free actor, like men, on all dimensions. So this includes agroecology and the entire rural sector, of course, because they have in their mind, and they have it in they have strength in their arms, and they have in their hearts, they have very strong feelings about agroecology. In their head, they have very strong, they have very good knowledge, and in their arms, they are capable and able to produce. So we need to value all of this this is an imperative to economic and social development in our countries. So we need to continue to work in this direction. Thank you, Fernand. Debiya. I would say the poverty effects in rural areas affect men and women. But in terms of ownership, they need to share with women. So I am going to launch a call to have a new call to have all organizations to accompany women in authorization, because I believe that they are the breath of life that maintains our free society. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Mariamé, Debiya, Jenn. We learned a lot from this conversation. We understood the importance of solidarity in dialogue, because we looked at several aspects of this here, and there's many of the people who listened to us today were going to go away with clear ideas of what we need to work about to ensure the equality of gender in rural settings. It was a pleasure for me to host this webinar, and it's part of a project, like Mariamé said, has the goal of emancipating rural women. So we're working with people in West Africa, but also in Canada, and I'm going to invite everybody listening in today to go to our website, interpares.ca, to take a look at the actions that we're taking across the world, and also to be able to see the results, the outcomes, the first outcomes of these projects that have been published in our newsletter. So I encourage you to read it and to sign up for the newsletter, and to consult the nfu.ca, endapronat.org, to look at all of the work that we're doing to ensure gender equality and to bring down the patriarchy. Thank you very much.
Malheureusement, le temps était très court. On aura d'autres occasions.
Beaucoup trop court.
Et on aura
Félicitations à toute l'équipe. Félicitations à Interpares et beaucoup de courage.